I rise today to share the story of a young man who didn't have the opportunity to share his own story. His name was Trey, and for years, he struggled in silence with the trauma and the wounds inflicted by someone he once trusted at a summer camp he attended for many years. So let me share Trey's story. Trey was a young man who loved the Lord. He loved his family, he loved his friends, and he proudly resided in my home state of Texas. As a young boy, Trey attended summer camp in Branson, Missouri, where he and dozens of other campers were sexually assaulted by the camp director. As an adult, Trey sought accountability. He filed a lawsuit against the camp he attended in an effort to hold the camp responsible and to seek justice, not only for himself, but for others. But instead of justice, Trey was offered a settlement. And that settlement came with a non-disclosure agreement, which mandated Trey's silence. After years of fighting to recover from abuse, Trey's settlement reminded him that his voice could be bought, that his story could be buried, that the price of compensation was silence. Trey once told his therapist, quote, "They will always control me, and I'll never be free." Not long after, Trey died by suicide. He was only 28 years old. No child who has endured sexual abuse should be forced to carry that horror in silence. No child should be forced to walk alone in that pain. And no child should be forced to accept agreements that protect the abuser. In Trey's case, and tragically many others, non-disclosure agreements are used to shield the abuser. Children are the most vulnerable and most precious members of our society. As legislators, as parents, as human beings, we have a moral obligation to stand between children and those who would harm them. That's why I've introduced Trey's Law. Trey's Law will protect, defend, and support children who are the victims of sexual assault. It ensures that non-disclosure agreements cannot be used to silence minors who have endured abuse. At the same time, the bill preserves the confidentiality of settlement amounts and allows victims themselves to insist on privacy if they so choose. What it does not allow is the forced silencing of victims in order to protect the abusers. Trey's Law establishes a clear national baseline. No NDA may be used to silence the disclosure of child sexual abuse. And importantly, this legislation does not prevent the states from going further. Versions of Trey's Law have already passed in Texas, in Alabama, in Missouri, Tennessee, California, and other states have also taken steps to prohibit the use of NDAs in cases of child sexual abuse. These are meaningful steps in the right direction, but we owe it to Trey and to every victim to ensure that they have the right to speak about their experiences. They have the right to rely on those around them, that they know their stories will not be silenced, and most importantly, that they are not alone. In just a moment, I will propound a unanimous consent request to take up and pass Trey's Law to make sure that no other children feel controlled or defeated by the system that is supposed to deliver them justice. Trey's Law has already passed the Judiciary Committee unanimously, and I want to thank Senators Gillibrand and Britt and my colleagues on the entire Judiciary Committee for working on this legislation and helping us push this across the finish line. And with that, I yield the floor to Senator Britt.
Mr. President.
The senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, I rise today to stand with Senator Cruz. Senator Cruz's leadership on this important issue has led us to today, a today where I am hopeful that the Senate will provide a unanimous vote for Trey's law. You heard Senator Cruz tell the story. It tugs at your heartstrings. It's unimaginable. As a parent, I cannot imagine my child enduring that, and then that child being forced into silence. It should never happen again. Victims should be in control of when and where and if they tell their story. They should never be silenced or sidelined. Trey's law has built momentum across the country. That's because, as Senator Cruz will tell you, of Elizabeth Carlock, Trey's sister, who has fought tirelessly to ensure that this never happens to another individual and another family ever has to endure this pain. When we're looking at this, I'm very proud that Alabama has led the way. Alabama passed Trey's law along with a number of other states, and in our state, Representative David Faulkner and State Senator Matt Woods ensured that Trey's law was signed by Governor Ivey into law. Today, we ask our colleagues to join us in this common sense and bipartisan piece of legislation that will ensure that no victim of child sexual abuse will ever be silenced. I urge the House to pass this bill and to send it to President Trump's desk. Look, there are a lot of times that we're out and we're talking to people in our states. We hear from constituents, we hear stories that tug at our heartstrings. I commend Senator Cruz, Senate Judiciary Committee, and certainly proud to be a part of that, for actually doing something about the tragedies that are facing everyday Americans. Today, let's honor Trey's memory. Let's ensure that abusers are not protected. Let's ensure that victims have a voice. And let's prevent tragedies like this from ever happening again. I yield back to my distinguished colleague from Texas.
Mr. President.
The senator from Texas.
I thank Senator Britt for her kind remarks and for her passionate leadership fighting alongside me to get this passed. If and when the Senate passes this, it will be a victory for Trey, a victory for his sister Elizabeth, who's been tireless fighting to honor the memory and legacy of her brother, a victory for the entire Carlock family, and a victory for kids who tragically have been the victims of sexual assault across the country. After the Senate passes this, I hope the House takes this legislation up quickly, passes it, and puts it on the President's desk to be signed into law. Therefore, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 413, S.3966.
Calendar number 413, S.3966, a bill to prohibit the enforcement of certain contractual clauses that restrict disclosure of sexual abuse of minors and for other purposes.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I yield the floor.